We'll go ahead and get started. As usual, I assume everybody knows who I am. I'm Deontay Copeland, CEO, Executive Director, National High School Basketball Association. And these ladies right here, introduce yourselves.
Hey everybody, my name is Shelby. I'm an intern at NHSBA. Nice to see everybody.
I'm Sydney. I'm also an intern with the NHSBA. Glad to have you guys here tonight.
And I am also intern Kennedy Jones, and thanks to everyone who tuned in tonight.
And of course, we have this guy right here in the corner right here, Mr. Coach John Perry. Say hi, Coach.
Hello, salute.
He is our coordinator for our NHSBA Atlanta area, and we have a special guest tonight, Mr. James Jeter from Ralph Lauren, is concept director for Ralph Lauren. And I also invited a special guest tonight, Miss Portia Davis. Say hi, Portia.
Hello.
Awesome. So we'll go ahead and get started. James, can you explain kind of your role, what you do for Ralph Lauren?
Sure. Yeah, of course. So, I'm a concept designer for Ralph Lauren, and essentially, we're the first point of the design process. Ralph Lauren is a lifestyle brand, and so he's really inspired by life. So whether it's, a nautical or whether it's collegiate, we'll take a school and build out a concept around it. We have these big rooms at our offices on Madison Avenue that we literally take vintage clothing, images, textiles, fabrics, and we create stories through the use of clothing. And then we'll meet with Ralph, he'll look at it, we'll discuss it, and then we'll get into the design process. And so that's like the sort of, if we talk about from farm to table, that's sort of the farm aspect of the design process. That's probably the most important part of our role. We also work on advertising. And so all the ads that you see for Ralph Lauren, our team, for men's polo, our team styles those out just to keep the messaging, sort of clear and consistent throughout. And so the team that builds out the initial concepts is also able to be the team that, again, the table part, just so that the message stays clear throughout the entire process.
Awesome. That's really cool to hear a little bit about how it works. For our students, I wanted to ask what got you into concept design, and essentially, was it people in your life or was it something you looked at in college? Could you just go into detail about that?
Yeah, so it was definitely, I didn't know it existed, before. And it's this funny thing that, you don't know that you want to do something until you're exposed to it. It was like, this is the perfect example of that. And I do think that exposure definitely leads to expansion. And so it definitely expanded my aspirations after being exposed to it. So I went to Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, and I had no desire at all to be a designer, to be completely honest. I wanted to be a writer. I always loved style and clothing, but I never really saw myself as a designer. I always loved the brand. I started working for Ralph Lauren when I was 16 years old from Washington, D.C. And, we had a rugby store down in Georgetown. And so I worked there on my days off and days after school and on the weekend. And so essentially the first internship I got at Ralph Lauren was in concept design for rugby. And one of the designers pulled me out of the store while I was working at the store in New York and said, hey, I would love an intern. And so that was my initial contact with concept design. And after being exposed to it, I fell in love. And, I had the aspiration of joining the design team for polo ever since having that initial internship.
So that's really dope that you got exposed to that. My question was a little bit about the same about high school, but I definitely wanted to know, how was it working on designing by yourself as an individual, and then when you went into this company, you had to do it, collaborate with other people. How was the adjustment there?
Yeah, I think you kind of learn through osmosis. It was kind of a organic kind of transformation from bringing in your own individual thought to a team and having your own individual kind of style and taste level, if you will, but then also having a role within an organization to deliver deliverables for the folks that you report to. And so, you know, it's different to have your own brand and design your own clothing with your own taste level and your own kind of inspirations. But then it's another thing to design for a company that has a history and a legacy and a sort of design codes, if you will. And then you sort of abide by those codes. And it's through that lens that you approach design. And so, you know, again, I think it was just through organic learning and experiential learning that I was able to adjust my personal taste to that of Ralph Lauren.
Speaking of just getting to work as a team member designing products, what's been your favorite project that you've been a part of?
That's a great question. I think, you know, there's been so many, to be honest, but I think probably one of the best ones to date may have been our 50th anniversary fashion show. It was such an amazing moment for everyone, especially for Ralph. You know, I'm very fortunate in my role to work very closely with Ralph, and in designing that 50th anniversary collection, it was everything really just coming together. I mean, for a designer to have had a brand for 50 years and to still be around to design it is something you don't really see every day. And so, you know, and I think just from a conceptual perspective, it was very diverse. There was men's, women's, kids, all the different brands, Polo, Purple Label, Collection, Double RL. And, you know, the fashion show was beautiful. We did it in Central Park, and, you know, everyone flew in from around the world, and the energy was just something I'll never forget. So I would say that would probably be my favorite so far.
Portia, did you have a question?
About how long would it take you to like design any of like your designs?
Yeah, so I think from concept to like the store, about a year. So right now, you know, we're conceptualizing spring for spring 2022. So it takes about a year, if not a little bit more. You know, and obviously with COVID and you know, travel, et cetera, those timelines are shifting, and we're having to shift with the times. And so that adds an extra level of complexity into a framework that we're sort of used to pre-COVID. And so now we're having to do things even further out, just to make sure that we're able to mitigate any problems that may occur, because everything is obviously remote.
Definitely. And I see we had some extra people online. I forgot to mention before we started, if you have any questions or anything, you can send those questions to chat to Sydney, and we'll be able to answer those questions, you know, in just a little bit when we get to the questions part. So my question for you also, James, is how did you go about landing this particular role with Ralph Lauren?
Yeah, so again, I think from the first moment that I started working for the brand, there was never a year where I didn't work for the brand. And so I started in the stores when I was 16. When I got to college, I was fortunate enough to get an internship the summer of my sophomore year. I was asked back the summer of my junior year. And then, you know, after graduating, I worked in the stores to get that experience in New York. I did that for about a year. And then after that, I was brought in onto the design team. You know, so I think to kind of answer your question a little deeper, I would say it's probably through networking, through building relationships, through being consistent and really having a game plan. You know, while part of it happened organically, and you know, even I didn't really plan to be a designer when I started, but the way that things unraveled in a way that I was able to be a little bit more strategic later in my career on where I wanted to go. And again, relationships have been extremely important. I couldn't have done it without a lot of the support of a lot of my colleagues and, people that hired me, but also just keeping in touch with people after internships, sending out letters to everyone that I worked with, sending out emails to check in, and just being really consistent on keeping those strong relationships throughout.
It's really nice to hear somebody talk so highly about networking. So I wanted to go ahead and ask a question revolving around networking. I just want to know what advice you would have for students who are looking to have good connections with people and to expand their network.
Yeah, so, obviously, again, I think there's an added complexity with COVID. Before you would see people would come into the store, for instance, and you just kind of pull them to the side and have a conversation. But now, while COVID has, kind of brought us all apart, in a lot of ways, it's also brought us closer together. I've Zoomed with more people, for instance, than maybe I've met with prior to COVID. And so, reaching out would probably be the best way via email, would probably be the best way kind of under these circumstances, whether it's through LinkedIn or whether it's through, a friend. That's another thing, having people that work in, companies that you aspire to work in. You can maybe ask them to, recommend someone that they can speak to or reach out. So I think a lot of people, especially now, love recommending other folks for jobs and for internships. So again, using your network to grow your network is probably the best advice I can get.
So yes, that is some great advice. So I also have another question. Throughout all the aspects of your job, I want to know, what is your favorite part? Because of course it can get overwhelming sometimes. So what keeps you there? What keeps you consistent?
Yeah. So, I think in my role, finding inspiration is probably my favorite part. It's this constant creative exploration for new ideas. And it sort of leads you on this journey of, exploring different cultures, exploring different, sort of styles from around the world. And I think the more you learn about it, the more you fall in love with the world and you realize how beautiful of a place it is. And so my role has allowed me to travel for inspiration, to buy vintage clothing. And so just always having that curiosity about what's new, what's fresh, but while still being authentic. Again, it's not about fashion. It's not necessarily about what's the new trend or the next trend, but how can we delve deeper into authentic storytelling, whether it's a pattern in Central America or working with, folks from the Native American community to develop a Navajo or Beacon prints with them. Things like that, I think, inspire me. And so looking for inspiration really, is probably the best part of my job. Yeah.
I really like that. That's interesting to me as well. We have a question from Coach Perry. So if you want to go and ask Coach Perry.
Yeah, he kind of alluded to it a little bit. My question was like, when you guys, when you come up with your different designs, do you take in, consideration the region, where you are? I know, like, being in Atlanta, they got a different flair than maybe, Miami, Florida, and, definitely different from the West Coast. Is that something you take in mind, or do y'all like, hey, this is what we're throwing out there, boom, like it or love it?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. I think for the most part, obviously there is targeted marketing for regions. I mean, it's a global brand. So for APAC, for instance, which is our, the sort of Asian region, they may want something different than North America. Or you think about it from a, climate perspective, we'll design different things for warmer climate places than we would for colder climate places. And then you have the segmentation of age group, and there's so many layers to it. And so I think for the most part, we'll have one sort of large brand message that kind of will resonate overarchingly. But then there's ways of kind of tapping into sort of subtle nuances via whether, again, climate, whether it's a different country, you know, and kind of playing into and being inspired by the things that they're inspired by. But for the most part, you know, what you see in America, you'll see the Oxfords and the knit shirts and all those big kind of concepts. You'll see it globally, and then there'll just be little kind of nuances from a region perspective.
I got one other question. You don't have to answer it, but I'm gonna throw it out there. What do you wear when you're not wearing Ralph Lauren? I can understand you can't answer now.
Oh, no, I don't mind at all. Ralph wears everything as well. Everyone, you know, I probably would say vintage, to be honest. Like, I think that's another thing. Like, after having worked at Ralph Lauren, your taste level changes because of the folks that you're around, and you're again exposed to so much that it kind of recalibrates your thought process around clothing. And so, you know, maybe prior to that, maybe I would think, oh, vintage is old and like it's recycled, like who wants to wear that? But now I see like there's something about the wash, the patina. There's a story in the paint marks on it or the holes in it, and having to mend and repair it kind of allows me to add to that story, to that garment. And so I would say vintage, absolutely. And I've been in the company 12 years, so I have a lot of Ralph Lauren clothing. But if it's a nice garment, I'll wear it despite the brand.
I got a question myself. Does it feel weird when you're in a store and you design something, you walk in the store, like, boom, I designed that shirt right there. That's one of my designs.
Yeah, earlier, I think in the beginning for sure, but I think after having been in the mix for so long, probably not so much anymore. But definitely, I remember the first time I saw something that I designed in the store, I couldn't believe it. But now, since it's so often, it doesn't affect me anymore that much, to be honest.
I have a question. How do you handle stress that comes with the job?
Wow, that's a great question. I think it's important to, I practice mindfulness. I think it's important to make sure to sort of be present and aware and mindful, but I also think it's important to find balance. And so, stress will come with any job. I think it's just a byproduct of these sort of stressful situations. But what is in your control is your ability to, again, find balance, step away, unplug. I love to meditate, for instance, like before a meeting, or listening to music, and again, being mindful. I think you can't take yourself or the job too seriously, especially if it's affecting your mental health regarding stress. Unplugging is, especially now with being on Zoom 24/7, it feels like putting that computer down or putting that phone down is extremely important. And so obviously taking care of myself as well, eating right and getting the right amount of rest, I think also helps to kind of diminish stress as well.
I have a question myself, actually. You talked briefly earlier about how since COVID, you've actually been able to Zoom with more people and meet more people than you might have in person. How else has COVID-19 affected your day-to-day activities and work?
Yeah, I think in a lot of different ways. Like, for instance, the way that I approach concepts now are more digital. And so where before we would build out physical concepts in a room that's tangible with clothing, now I'm having to do so with images, which I think is a blessing and a curse. It allows you to iterate a lot of different concepts under the same sort of umbrella, if you will. So I can do a concept and then do one that's blue and white and then throw orange in it, or try it with faded colors, or try one with clear colors. Whereas before in a room, you're so limited to space that you really just have a wall and you have that. Now I can, again, iterate. I can add, supplementary research to it. And so it's actually unlocked a lot from a conceptual perspective, because again, it allows you to do so much on a computer digitally that you just can't do in a physical space. So that part has actually been great. But on the contrary, I think the inability to, stop by someone's desk or feel fabric, because fashion is obviously a very tactile industry. You have to kind of touch the fabric to understand it. And so not being able to do that has definitely affected me. But I think in my role as a concept designer, it's not as important as someone who's like a technical designer who has to deal with those, fabrics every single day.
Well, man, James, this is definitely great. I have one more question myself. It's always unique to see kind of in different parts of the country, the different fashions. Like you have like the South is kind of more conservative. You have some, on the West Coast is a different style. You have the North different style. It's like, can you, is there certain types of apparel that really sells differently as far as, I guess, the amount of apparel that sells? I know this makes any sense. Is there a certain type of apparel that sells more in one area than it does in other areas?
Yeah, I would say so. I think, to your point, I think there are definitely some styles that in the South may do better than in the North. I think it also depends on sort of metropolitan areas where there's a lot of offices. Maybe suits may sell better there, or places where there aren't a ton of corporate spaces. Maybe, athleisure clothing sells better there, or, half zips for, business casual may sell better in the South, for instance. And, you also have, preppy schools throughout that, may do better in certain places than others. And so, absolutely, I definitely think, while American style as a whole, I think you can probably find folks in every state that can find something at Ralph Lauren. It's such a large brand that there's something for everybody. And then we also have a lot of different channels, meaning our distribution channels. So we don't have a physical store in every state, but there may be a Macy's or a Bloomingdale's or a wholesale store, and wholesale tends to sell certain items that our stores don't sell. And so that also affects what kind of clothing is bought and sold in different parts of the country.
Well, definitely awesome. We got a few minutes left. I guess we're gonna get ready to run down for a round of time. So I guess any final thoughts or anything you have before we start to wrap up?
I think, especially this year in 2020, I think fashion is taking a very interesting turn in terms of creating meaningful product, and stories and storytelling is so important. And, you often hear in the fashion world, especially if something is being taken too seriously, we're not saving lives. But I would argue that fashion has the ability to change people's lives, because we project images, we tell stories, and it affects culture. It affects the way that folks look at themselves. And so I think storytelling is extremely important. And, and I think through fashion, we're finding that meaningful design, meaningful storytelling will always be more important than the shallowness of clothing. And so, I think a lot of people don't mention that often enough. And so I would just leave everyone with that.
Well, I know you guys are definitely in business because of myself, because I like Ralph Lauren myself. So when you said your team cross between, it's probably me purchasing another piece of Ralph Lauren product.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, man, James, thank you so much for speaking to us today, man. We appreciate it. you have a great holiday, man. I know Thanksgiving's coming up next week, so definitely happy holidays to you and your family. And of course, everybody that's on here tonight, happy holidays. Have a great Thanksgiving. And of course, we'll see you not next week, but the week after for our sessions on next week.
Morehouse grad. Love